Hi, it's Alison from the Law School Toolbox. Today, I'm excited to have law professor and creator of spaced repetition, Gabe Teninbaum, here with me to talk about what law students should know about new law and legal tech. So welcome, Gabe.
Thanks for having me, Allison. Pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. We have chatted before about your tool, spacedrepetition.com. So I think that's a great tool. People can check it out. They could even get 15% off if they use the code TOOLBOX, all caps. All right. Well, to start us off, can you give our listeners just a little bit of background about you and your work, just so they have some context here?
Gladly. So I'm a law professor by trade. I teach at Suffolk University Law School in Boston. And for the last 10 years or so, I've overseen our legal innovation and technology program. And the premise of this program is that the future of legal work is likely going to look very different than the present day. And we want to make sure that our students are ready for it. And by extension, I try to help students at other schools too.
Nice. Do you have a tech background? Like, how did you get into this?
I'm fully self-taught. I had a colleague that was deeply interested and invested in this area, and I started using what are called low-code, no-code tools that allow people that don't have a deep tech background to build things sort of with intermediaries that make it easier to do without having that real deep knowledge.
Yeah, interesting. I'm sure we'll get more into that as we get more into like the vibe coding world of today. What do you mean by legal tech? Like, what are we even talking about here?
Narrowly, legal tech is a set of software tools that have been created to make law practice or the delivery of legal services more efficient and effective. But broadly, and there's really no one single settled definition of legal tech, it's a mindset. And the idea is that we want to adopt the right tools to solve problems in law, and often that involves using software or other technologies.
Cool. I was a programmer before law school, so you're speaking my language. But why do you even care about this? Why do you think this is important?
Sure, for a couple of reasons. One, I work to serve my students and law students generally. And the reality is that one can do a better job as a legal professional if they know something about legal tech and they find the right tools to use in the right scenario. And actually, the American Bar Association has thought about this, and I've taken heed of the guidance they've given. They've said that all lawyers have a duty of technological competence, which is the idea that you have to be aware of the relevant tools for your area of law practice, and you have to make a risk-benefit judgment about whether to use them along with your clients. And I try to incorporate that into what we teach. And then I'm going to give a part two to that. I care more broadly about society and the way that law impacts society. There are a lot of people out there that just can't get access to human lawyers or full access to legal services. They're not rich enough to afford a lawyer. They're not poor enough, or they can't wait in line long enough to get legal aid. And legal tech is a way to help those folks too. So it's important on multiple levels.
Nice. And why do you think this should matter or does matter to students and people who are going to be graduating or recently graduated?
Well, there's no doubt that the pace of technological innovation is getting faster and faster. So it was only 2 years ago that ChatGPT and generative AI tools came along. It was only 15 or 16 years ago that we all started using iPhones. I think it was 2007 or 2008 that they came along. So society has changed in all of these massive ways. And the reality is that law school curricula really hasn't changed very much. I mean, the same first year that you and I took, or the same first years that students now are taking, it's the same first year that students in 1950 were taking. And the importance of moving us collectively forward has never been more significant than as more of these tools came along that can allow us to do better work.
Yeah. So kind of frame this for me for people who aren't so familiar with the legal profession, maybe yet. Tell me a little bit about the traditional model of legal work and also how things are shifting.
Traditionally, lawyers billed by the hour, meaning that you got paid based on how long it took for you to complete a task. So if someone comes in and says, can you draft a prenuptial agreement for me? If it took you 5 hours and your billable rate was $200 an hour, you would bill $1,000. And this, for eons, for the last 100 plus years, has been the dominant model of the delivery of legal services. And it's problematic for all these reasons. One is you as a lawyer have incentives that aren't necessarily aligned with your clients. You want to, of course, do the job as effectively and as efficiently as possible. And you want there to be incentives for you to do better work and do it faster, but that's not how you get paid. And in the last 10, 15, 20 years, tools have started to emerge that allowed lawyers to flip that a little bit. and to say, oh, I can now do most of the work of creating a document, a prenuptial agreement, using software. And instead of it taking 5 hours, I can make it take 1 hour. And then from there, I can spend more time with that client, or I can take on an additional client, or I can pass along savings to clients. So it makes for a better legal ecosystem if people have started to adopt these tools. And we're starting to see that happen at the edges. There are now law firms that make it part of their business model to use these tools to make their work more efficient. They save money for clients, they save themselves times and headaches, and they come up with a better product at the end of the day.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the most mystifying aspects to me of working in a big law firm was I was like, wait, so you're going to reward me based on how long this takes me, not like at the shorter time frame. Like, I'm a programmer. I can make a lot of this a lot faster for you. And they're like, yeah, that's not really the business model. So I actually read Tim Ferriss's, book, The 4 Hour Work Week, while working as a big law associate. And that was very eye-opening to me. I was like, okay, maybe this is not the way I want to spend my life. So tell me a little bit about, how tech is really changing things and also what the expectations might be for lawyers moving forward.
On the immediate level, clients are beginning to ask questions about how their time is being spent. So historically, a lawyer would just sort of send an invoice to the client at the end of the month and say 30 hours, for services rendered. Over time, they've been encouraged, or in some instances forced, to have a really detailed itemization of how they spent their time. And clients have started to refuse to pay for certain tasks. Or they'll have their own metrics and they'll say, hey, you were going to write this type of letter. You charge us for 3 hours. We know that should only take 1 hour. So there's some a little bit of pressure that's starting to come back from clients to law firms saying, we're not going to overpay for this. You need to either find a better way to do it, or you need to write off those hours. So what that's meant for law firms is they've started to look meaningfully about how they can employ these sorts of technologies at the edges. And the way that they're doing that is by training some associates and also hiring wholly new roles at law firms. So historically, when you worked at a law firm as a lawyer, as a licensed legal professional, you were an associate, meaning a staff member who was an attorney that didn't own part of the firm. And if you were successful, you might have made partner. Those were the only two things that you could really be back in the old days. Now there are all of these different roles that people have at law firms as licensed attorneys that do things like make sure that you're providing the best value for the client using the most relevant technology, having the lowest error rate, and able to communicate that effectively. So things like knowledge engineers, people that put together little software packages, maybe like something that you would have done, Alison, in your days as a developer, or legal solutions architects, which is sort of a cool title. These are people that look at a big set of problems and say, how can we approach this in an entirely different way to make this process work better? There are also people that are process improvement experts that work at law firms. These ideas that were borrowed from manufacturing and from assembly lines can be applied to complex legal work. So there are people that are either traditional attorneys that are trained in these roles or people that are hired specifically for them. And then there's one other role that we should talk about, and that's chief innovation officers. A chief innovation officer was historically something that would exist at a Fortune 500 company, a for-profit publicly traded company, with the idea being that you needed to express to shareholders, hey, we're not just doing what we're doing, we're always looking a little bit ahead. Law firms are now hiring chief innovation officers, with the idea being that someone needs to be in charge of being aware of what the relevant technologies are and getting that information out to the practitioners so that they can make good decisions about them.
That's so interesting to me because I know law firms are not necessarily known as bastions of innovation. So it's so interesting that some of them actually are kind of taking this different approach. Yeah, that's really very interesting. And so if students are listening to this and saying like, oh, this sounds kind of cool, like maybe I want to do that, what kind of skills should they be thinking about trying to develop here?
There are a number of skills that law students or practicing lawyers can develop, and that's even without a computer science background. So the first is rule-based reasoning. Now, everyone that goes to law school knows something about rule-based reasoning. If you've taken a first-year legal writing class and you've been asked to take a rule and dissect that rule and apply it to facts, essentially take language and turn it into a decision tree, that is rule-based reasoning. And that's the basis of this thing that we call computational law or computational thinking. And it's being able to issue spot a legal problem and say, that's the sort of legal problem that I could automate, or that's the sort of legal problem that I could take and I could build into a piece of software. And that has the advantage of allowing me to take my knowledge and to make it so I don't always have to be the one that's applying it. It can work 24/7. It can work on the cloud. It's never going to take a sick day. There are all sorts of limitations to it, but that sort of computational thinking can be really important. And I can share some ways that people specifically can get into that. Next is having some comfort with data and metrics, the ability to think about and quantify problems, to make good judgments so that when a client comes to you and says, look, what's my chance on this motion for summary judgment? It's not just based on gut instinct. It's you thinking meaningfully about, well, wait a minute, my firm has looked at 1,000 similar matters. What can we divine from what we've done in the past so that I can actually give a client actionable information so that they can make some good decisions about it? Next is the idea that one has to maintain technological competence. I made reference a little bit ago to the ABA's rule. It's Rule 1.1, comment 8, if anyone wants to read the original language. Incidentally, it's been adopted now in 41 U.S. jurisdictions. So almost all of your listeners will be subject to this rule. And the idea here is that one of the things that you have to do is stay up on what's relevant in legal tech, and that's an affirmative obligation that you have as a lawyer. There are easy ways to do that. There are wonderful blogs and LinkedIn pages and X/Twitter opportunities so that you can have a sense for actually what's going on in legal tech and stay aware. And then let me add one more, and this might sound sort of counterintuitive for someone that's talking about technology. It's really important to maintain what have historically been called soft skills, although I don't love that term. Things like communication and collaboration, creativity and empathy and teamwork. And the reality is that as impressive as AI tools and specifically generative AI tools have become, they still can't replace those things. And the model that I see for the future of lawyering will require people to do more of two things. One is adopt more appropriate technologies that are going to solve problems more efficiently and effectively. But on the other end of the spectrum, be better at communicating about those things. In other words, for a client to hire you when they could just go out and pay for an app, there has to be a reason. And part of that reason has to be you as an expert have to be able to communicate with them and answer their questions and help them creatively problem solve in ways that software can't.
Let me ask you a question. So as you were talking about the computational thinking and the real rule-based reasoning, I was thinking back to something I actually worked on in law school because I took a clinic, very forward thinking at the time, called Lawyering in the Digital Age. And the project I worked on was with the housing court in New York. And the idea was we would have this system where people would come in, tenants who were generally unrepresented, and kind of, would walk them through, like, do you have this problem? Do you have that problem? These are all statutory defenses. And then it would print out at the end and they could show it to the judge. And it would be, getting them closer to having had a lawyer, obviously not. So, that was quite a while ago at this point. What do you think is different now? Do you think it's just the technology has advanced to the point where we could just do all of this stuff more easily?
The short answer is yes. So what we're talking about, rule-based reasoning systems in law, are a old branch of artificial intelligence, which again sounds a little bit silly, but our expert systems as a form of AI has been around for 50, 60, 70 years. And consumers will know about products like LegalZoom, which use the same sort of technology to, again, go directly to consumers, cut out the lawyers, and allow them to solve certain classes of simple legal problems. What's changed is that those tools have become much, much easier for people who don't have a deep background to build on their own. So let me give one example from my own life. At Suffolk Law, we have a group called the LIT Lab, the Legal Innovation and Technology Lab. If anyone's interested, it's suffolklitlab.org. And what they do is they work with courts and legal aid organizations to build just the sort of solutions that you have suggested. They go to the court and they say, what's the most important thing that people are coming to you that they're having to wait in line for a long time on? Or they're coming in unrepresented and they're messing up the form. And in some instances, it's things like eviction defense forms. And, if someone has a landlord who's sophisticated and has a lawyer, they're going to steamroll the tenant every single time unless they have
every
support.
Time.
So the question is, can you build automation so that someone could go onto a web app or a website and answer a certain set of questions, and figure out if they're eligible to, defend this action. And if so, we can actually do what you did in your clinic, and we can do something a step further. We can take their answers and populate them onto a form. That form is in the form that the court wants to see it from, and then we can electronically file it. And we started doing this actually at scale during the pandemic at Suffolk Law. And we started building forms because people couldn't get into the courts. And they're forms, everything from abuse prevention orders that someone would need to fill in the information, to block out evictions, to children in need of supervision, to other just sort of everyday dreary administrative forms. Like someone needs to file for a alimony hearing in court, but there's a $10 fee that goes along with it. They don't have the money for it. So there's a waiver form. So we built little automations so that someone who's comfortable, it's not going to fit everyone, but someone that is literate, computer literate, is comfortable using software, and is willing to, do this instead of go waiting in line in legal aid, can go self-help. And in the last few years, we've gone from one state, Massachusetts, where we are, we're now in 8 states, helping people at absolutely no cost. Last year, the statistic I saw was that we had 40,000 forms that had been downloaded and submitted to courts. And this is all stuff that's done, incidentally, by law students without computer science background. So it might have been that in your day and my day, when you did this in a clinic, there was 12 students working on one form, and you hope 3 or 4 of them have computer science backgrounds. The reality is that nowadays, any student who, wants to make a difference can go get involved in a project like this and launch something like now, within, months, weeks, days, or maybe even hours. Really easy to use.
That's so interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, because I know you had some tools that you thought people might be interested in. Tell me a little more about some of the things that people could start experimenting with.
Sure. So I'll give my first, and this is actually a plug for a colleague's tool, although this is free and open source. You're never going to be asked to pay any money for this. It's called Q&A, the letters Q&A, markup.org. Q&A markup is an expert system tool. It takes decision trees and it turns them into software. So I do an exercise with my students where I present them with a straightforward legal problem. Is this a violation of the Fair Labor Standards Act? And I give them the Fair Labor Standards Act, and they dissect the language, and they say, well, wait a minute. If I was a lawyer sitting across from a client, what questions would I have to ask? And what are all the permutations? What are all the answers that one could give? And where would that lead me to in terms of the next question? Q&A markup allows you to take that logic and turn it into a piece of software. And you can learn how to use Q&A markup in, 20 minutes to basic competence, an hour to being pretty good, and 3 or 4 hours to absolute expertise. It's totally free. It's open source, which means for those techie out there that if you actually like the software, but you want to change some aspect of it, you can actually download the code and change the software as you see fit. But there are also more sophisticated tools that one can use. Q&A markup is really for teaching and modeling. But there are things like docassemble.org, which is another free open source tool that allows one to do the same sort of decision trees, but then to take the answers and put the answers onto a form or a document. So if you say, look, I know that a lot of people in my law school clinic want to get their names changed. They're getting divorced, or they've had a bad relationship and they had one name and they want to have a different name. There's a form for that. I want to ask them the questions I would have to ask as a lawyer, and I want to take their answers and I want to push them into a form, and then I want to electronically file it. Docassemble.org would allow you to do that, and that hooks up with Python. So developers like you could then build on top of that if they wanted to do more sophisticated things like put up a paywall or translate it automatically to a different language. If that's too sophisticated, and it will be for some people, there's this really interesting class of low-code, no-code tools that allow people to build things like Legos. So it's not that you're not building, it's just that it allows you to cut a few corners. One of my favorites is called Gavel.io. Gavel.io is a company that is for-profit and venture funded and is really trying to make a place in the market, but they have free trial accounts for law students. And you can build something that's really effective. I think, when you pay, and it's relatively inexpensive to pay for it, the only thing that you get is like they don't put their watermark on it. But if you're using it just to learn how to use it and consider whether you run a project, it's really easy to use. And it's fun, and it's the sort of thing all students should do. Let me give you a couple more. legal research has come a long way. All law students are going to have Lexis and Westlaw, but Casetext was a company that was doing really interesting things with generative AI early on, and they were bought out by Thomson Reuters, Westlaw. And you can now use CoCounsel, which is the next step of Casetext, directly on CoCounsel. It does all these really interesting things. So rather than do Boolean logic searching like you and I used to do, or natural language searching, which is a significant advance, you can now query it using just plain language and say, look, I want you to draft a motion that argues these three things. I'm going to paste some facts in there. I want you to use Massachusetts law. I want you only to use binding cases, and I want you to avoid this specific case. And it will come up with a brief that's really wonderful and excellent almost immediately. Now, there's limitations there. The software is not perfect. It hallucinates. And also, one of the problems and one of the real risks of all of these technologies is they can be so good at helping you cut corners that you could lose something if you're too reliant on them, with the idea being that one of the things that you learn as a law student is how to reason in an analog fashion, which allow you to create a mental model. So that when you see a problem, you immediately start to say, oh, here's how I can resolve that problem. If rather than having that struggle, you just say, build me an app, build me a brief, build me a motion, you're losing something there. So I want to caution people about being over-reliant on any of these tools, particularly generative AI tools, but a little smattering of them is really important and really valuable for them.
I think it's really important to use them so that you understand the, upsides and downsides and what they're good at and what they're not good at. I mean, I'll give you one example. I was working with Claude yesterday on, working on creating some next gen bar style content from some other content. And at a surface level, it all looks really convincing. But then sometimes when and I haven't gone through this in detail because one of the things I actually need to do is, print it out and really think about it. But one example is it had some, short answer question or something where it fundamentally mixed up somebody who drafted a check versus someone who'd be cashing a check from sentence to sentence. It's that kind of thing where you're like, oh, this doesn't actually have that type of logic. It doesn't understand that this matters. So there are things like that are still really bad in some of these AI tools, which I find surprising.
Yeah, I think over time we'll see that there are less errors and less hallucinations, but they can always occur. I mean, if you rewind 20 years, a standard caution was don't rely on Wikipedia. It's created by the crowd. You don't know who the crowd is. You don't know what they know, and it's going to be wrong. And what happened is that over time, there were less and less errors in Wikipedia to the point where actually if you tested it against traditionally published encyclopedias like Encyclopedia Britannica, Wikipedia was less error prone. But that's not to say that there aren't still problems with it. In fact, there have been a couple of media pieces just in the last week about how, politics has seeped its way into objective fact and people are changing information all the time. And this is just an example of how, even as something might become less error prone than the methods that you're using now, there are always going to be new threat profiles that arise with it. And staying aware of those is important.
No, in this case, I was curious about this one because 2 years ago when they first came out, I had a similar situation where it mixed up like a plaintiff and a defendant in a way that mattered. And I was like, oh, that's pretty obvious. And I'm like, wow, it's still doing that. Okay, good to know. But I think you need to use the tools. I mean, I've seen data that says people who use the AI tools are more skeptical of them than people who don't. So I think it's important to actually get your hands dirty with this stuff and see what it's good at and what it's not great at. All right. Well, what else can students be doing in law school to kind of get exposure? If you're listening and saying, "Oh, this sounds really interesting. I want to explore this more."
Yeah, there are all sorts of wonderful resources out there. So in terms of learning, checking out the software that I mentioned is really good. Another thing that you might do is check to see if your school or institution that you're associated with has an account for LinkedIn Learning. LinkedIn Learning used to be known as lynda.com. It's a just-in-time learning resource, and the quality of content is really, really high. So if you want to learn how to make pivot tables in Excel, or you want to learn how to use Power BI by Microsoft, you can go in and get really wonderful content as part of what's typically a free license at universities to learn things. And then from there, what you have to do is to start thinking about, what are the things that I could use to help me solve real problems at work. The other thing that people can do is they can start to stay up on legal innovation and technology so that they're aware just generally what's happening. Again, most of you are going to be obligated under your model rules of professional conduct to stay up on it. So there are sites like the Law Sites blog. There's a blogger and writer named Bob Ambrosi who writes free content. There's no paywall. And he regularly lets people know what new legal tech products are out there and what's going on with law firms and what law departments are doing to employ these sorts of things. And it's important for people to know what's possible. There's another wonderful one called The Artificial Lawyer, again, free and publicly available. And from there, get yourself on LinkedIn and start seeing who's writing about legal innovation and technology. You're welcome to pair with me. I tend to repost interesting things people have said and just get a sense for what's happening in the fields that you're interested in and figure out where it makes time for you to make sense for you to dive deep. Then I'll say one other thing. The legal innovation and technology community is still small enough that people tend to be charmed when a law student reaches out to them. You know, there's probably 6 or 8 law schools in the US that have taken a real investment in legal innovation and technology, and Suffolk is certainly one of them. But for the most part, law students and law graduates haven't been exposed to this. So when someone is working on legal tech and they have a law student reach out to them and say, hey, I go to law school X, we don't really have a program. Can you help me understand what you're doing and how I might get involved? It's like manna from heaven to them because it's like someone heard, right? And I know you talk about the importance of things like, you know, networks and mentoring, but this is still a real opportunity. It might not be in 10 years when there are enough people doing it that it's, you know, people are too busy for it. But for now, make that LinkedIn outreach or find someone on a website or at their company and just reach out to them and see if they'll connect with you.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. I think people are actually very delighted that someone's interested in what they're doing oftentimes. So if this is an area of interest, you know, this is not, I think, probably the mindset that a lot of people who go to law school have. So I think if you are somebody who finds this interesting, there probably are, you know, you're probably one of a relatively rarefied number of people at this point, I would imagine. Do you think that's right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's probably only a few hundred lawyers in the country that would frame themselves as working in legal tech. So there's a real opportunity here to make an early, strong step and to get involved.
And before we wrap up, let's talk a little, what do you think the future holds? Like, you know, I mean, obviously the Gen AI stuff has come on really quickly and progressed rapidly, but what do you think the next 5 to 10 years might look like here?
That's hard. The answer is I don't know.
Of course.
Justice as a concept has been around since, you know, history has existed. So there'll always be some form of history, and our systems will probably always be too complex for people to deal with the justice system without intermediaries. But the direct question, what will lawyering look like in a year or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years? I don't quite know. I think in a year, it'll probably look basically the same. 5 or 10 years, I'm not quite sure. So if you look at the charts of the impact of generative AI, it's already been significant in the sense that a lot of the tasks that lawyers do can be replaced by generative AI and can be done much more effectively and efficiently by generative AI. And that's particularly hard because it's the kind of work that first, second, and third year associates, as well as summer law clerks, would do and bill hours for. So I expect law firms will have to change their business models so that they are leveraging some of these tools so that they're moving away from a purely billable hour model and doing more things that are value-based billing, you know, rather than saying we're going to charge you $200 an hour or $2,000 an hour, as it's more accurately is now. we're going to charge you for the result. We're going to charge you for doing this M&A and do it as a flat fee. And once law firms writ large change to that model, that will allow lawyering to change in a really significant way. So my hope, I don't know if my expectation, but my hope is in the next few years that model will really come to pass.
Yeah, I read a book, I think it was by Richard Susskind recently. He's got a new book out on kind of like AI and the law. And that's kind of what he was saying. It's like, you know, you're really selling the solution and people need to sort of get in that mindset if they're going to do well here.
That's just right. And incidentally, Richard Susskind's book, Tomorrow's Lawyers, he has several books, including this wonderful new book on AI. Tomorrow's Lawyers is probably the starting point for someone that is going to enter the legal field. He wrote it a number of years ago, but the reality is that the theory still applies completely. In fact, has been confirmed in important ways. So do yourselves a favor, go on Amazon and spend the $10 and read that, because it'll change the way that you see things.
Yeah, exactly. He's got another like future of the profession ones I picked up. So lots of interesting stuff there. All right, Gabe. Well, we're about out of time here. Any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Just my appreciation for you, Alison. Thank you for your time and energy. And for the listeners of the podcast, thank you for being here.
All right. And remind us how people can reach out and find out more if they do find this interesting and they want to speak with you about it.
Absolutely. You can reach out to me personally. I'm always glad to hear from anyone that's interested in this topic. I'm on LinkedIn, Gabriel Teninbaum, Teninbaum, or you can find me at the Suffolk University Law School website. Reach out. Glad to talk to anyone who's interested.
Sounds great. And they can also go to Spaced Repetition and use our code. All right, everybody. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe so you don't miss anything. You can check out lawschooltoolbox.com and reach out with any questions.